to successfully join. And hopefully we've got a great presentation lined up for you. As I was just talking to Bob before some of you joined, or maybe while you guys were joining, Bob came and did a presentation for us at Georgia Tech a couple of years ago, and we found his information to be very useful. He's a great speaker. He's very engaging. So I would assume that for any of you guys that have questions and need things answered, please just go ahead and post those in the chat as we go along. And I'm sure Bob will do his best at the end to field some of those questions as we go along. But as you guys got the notification from Katie and Nancy and our management firm of Shima, the reason why we pulled this together was this particular COP research and survey had pulled together a vital statistics survey and wanted to go over some of the results of that. And again, kind of handing things off to Bob here in terms of, how we can pull all this together. I know that, various groups within Shima, various communities of practice, some of our committees and working groups are working on a number of things related to this topic. So I think that hopefully most of you guys, if not all of you guys, will find this at least somewhat useful to some of the efforts that you all are working on, and can take this information and do something, extremely useful with it moving forward. So with that being said, Robert Ott, Otu, and Bob Emery are kind of the ones that coordinated all this together. I believe Bob is going to be the one that's mainly presenting the information today, but I would like for them to do a better job introducing themselves than I will do for them. So with that being said, Bob Emery, I'll go ahead and hand it off to you and we can get started.
Sure. Thank you. So I'm, hold on one second. I want to make sure I'm sharing my screen. So give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Yep, okay, perfect. So anyhow, so I'm Bob Emery. I'm the safety guy here at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston. We just got new shirts today, by the way. So looky there, it's got the logo. So what I want to talk about today is this notion of trying to communicate to others the value of prevention. If you think about it, in the safety program, on a good day, nothing happens. But as a profession, we have to get better at being able to tell the story about the resources that are needed to make nothing happen. And so we've embarked on a project that's now been 15 years, I believe, where we've been trying to collect data to tell the story about what are the key predictors, at least for EH&S programs for universities, because I get a call literally once a week, and I'm not exaggerating. Once a week, I get a call from a new university administrator who says, I got your name from somebody, probably from the bathroom wall, I don't know, but it says, under my purview, I've got many different things, but I've got safety, and I'm not sure how much it is we're supposed to be doing to support the safety program. So I get called in a lot on that sort of stuff. So that's really what I want to talk about today. And I want to implore everyone here, please contribute to the survey that's currently underway for the benchmarking survey, because that's critically important. We'll talk about that in a second. So what I'll do is want to make sure I acknowledge all the folks who've been involved in this process. I think there are 3 things that I wish someone had told me 35 years ago. I'll cover that, and then summarize the projects we've carried out. And then there's been a lot of chatter recently about this notion of key performance indicators. I'll try to summarize those. And then again, underscoring this notion of the vital statistics. More importantly, I want this to be a conversation rather than death by PowerPoint. So I hope, I guess we've set aside an hour here, but I want to go through the PowerPoint quickly, but what I really want is the feedback. I suspect O2 and others that are on this thing want that as well. So just quickly, that's me. The university takes photos, and there's your glamour photo. But my position's a bit odd in that I'm 85% safety guy and then 15% faculty. So that's kind of an interesting arrangement. We created this boot camp some years ago about how to do health and safety for a university environment, kind of interesting. And then we've done a bunch of peer reviews. So that's really interesting when you go to another university and kind of come from the outside in and look and say, this works well, and you might want to consider these other things. So that's my perspective. Do want to acknowledge the folks who have gone through this process: Jing Wang, Bruce Brown, who's now at UT Southwestern, Seth, Jason Shu, Jeanette De La Russa Ducut, Otu, who's our current indentured servitude, which is a polite term for the graduate student trying to do the project, and then the SHEMA leadership and the research and survey community of practice folks. All of them have been instrumental in shepherding this thing along. So let me start or preface this discussion with there are three things I think we need to recognize. And I didn't know this 35 years ago. But number one is universities compare many things. I won't bore you with reading the PowerPoint slide, but there's a lot of things: how many students, how many buildings, blah, 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 blah. And so what some of my colleagues don't perhaps understand is that while individuals may be insolvable puzzles, in aggregate, they become mathematical certainties. Most importantly, is the quote at the bottom, is comparison is the mother of insight. And again, these are all the calls I get each week about, I'm not sure what it is we're supposed to have for this abstract concept, which is safety. And number two is the constancy of change. And I have stood in front of large groups and asked a simple question: how long have you personally reported to the person you report to? And it's weird that about 80% have reported to the person they report to, not the position, but you. How long have you reported to that human? It's less than 5 years. And for 25%, it's less than a year. So if you flip that around, what that means is that you and I are going to have between 6 and 30 different bosses over a 30-year working career. There's good news and bad news to that. The bad news is, especially if people that are kind of moving out of the system, if you look at the retirements for EH&S seasoned leaders in the next 5 years, you're going to lose vast institutional knowledge. The good news is you'll get fresh ideas and perspectives, energy, and people who are very comfortable with the technology that we are immersed in as we speak. So I guess one of the things I've become passionate about is making sure that you explain to upper management, which may be changing on a regular basis, here's what we do, here's the value we bring to the table. And then the third point is, as safety people, we are hardwired to measure data for compliance purposes, but oftentimes that doesn't relate to measures of performance. And I'll just take the first point here. We are compelled by RCRA to compile the pounds of hazardous waste that we generate, but we are not compelled to collect the data on the number of pickups. How many individual things did we have to roller skate around and go pick up? And so my point here is that safety needs to get better at collecting almost two sets of books. One set of books is for regulatory purpose, but another one is for performance or activity purposes. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Okay, so all those things are going along, and there's been a lot of chatter on the SHEMA cafe about this issue of key performance indicators. And at the end of the day, I'm going to argue that from a president or chancellor's perspective, with regard to what a safety program does, these are the 4 pillars. Number 1 is how many people got sick, injured, or died, and how much property loss occurred. At the end of the day, that's kind of really important. That's number 1. Second is regulatory agencies come in and inspect us. What they find? What are we doing? Are we squared away? Do we have to repair it? You get the idea. Third one is finances. How much do we cost? Are we doing any cost control or cost avoidance? And then the fourth one is really important, measured client satisfaction. Not idle complaining in the elevator, but we did a survey and here's what we found. And so I think, and again, I'm gonna stop yapping here in a little bit, but the I would argue that those are the indicators of how the safety program's doing, whether you like it or not. So you better make sure the data flows up into that. So we've already talked about this. Safety programs, on a good day, nothing happens. But the perspective of the safety or the leadership can be like, you guys are just interfering. What is it you do? You're just kind of gunking up the works. Hence why it's so important for us to be able to tell our story here. So, okay, so in public health, you are indoctrinated about what's called a logic model. And that has to do with inputs and outcomes. And let me underscore this, not outputs, but outcomes. So everyone on this call is involved with institutional inputs, which would be in the form of EH&S budget and staff. And on the other end, here are the ultimate outcomes. How many people got sick, injured, or died? How much property got damaged? Environmental releases, external regulatory inspections, and measured client satisfaction. What I find fascinating from doing all these peer reviews, and I want you to notice the colors there, is that this data all seems to reside in different groups rather than a single department. So the student data goes over here, employees over there, visitors somewhere else, property loss. How can you have a complete picture of what's going on if you don't have all this coming together in some form or fashion? And so one could argue not everything that gets measured matters, but what matters absolutely should get measured. That's kind of an important point. So the middle block here is all the stuff that you and I do as safety geeks to make sure this stuff happens. Or in hopes, if you think about it, these 2 blocks to the left are leading indicators and the block to the right is a lagging indicator. But I really want to focus your attention to the last bullet there. And I don't know if Dr. Jeanette Della Rosa Ducata is on this call, but she really, she gave me religion on this issue, and I resonate with her point. And that was, safety programs need to establish a relationship with the constituencies that they support. So can I pause here for a second? Janet, are you on? Or okay, all right, well, anyhow, if she's not on, anyhow, kudos to her on that. Hello? Janet, are you on? Okay, she's at University of California, Riverside, but is instrumental in coordinating safety stuff across the University of California system. So, okay, so now we get to the point of O2's project and our passion, and that is, what I was very interested in is, what is it that drives the inputs that gets the outcomes? And what we've learned over a series of projects is, when we bring people in for this EHS Academy and we ask them, how big is your campus? People will say how many students they have, how many buildings they have. different measures, but it turns out statistically that the most important measure, the most significant measure, is total net assignable square footage. In other words, the square footage of the campus that can be assigned to some activity. And then the second term I have listed there is complexity, which has to do with, I believe, research square footage, and that's something I'll get O2 here in a second to talk about this, but the percent of square footage that is research, that's really important as well. And then experience, you know, has something gone wrong recently? That kind of speaks to the inputs. And then the outputs or the outcomes is how are we doing? What do we compare to? And that I find fascinating as well. So what we were able to do, at least the University of Texas system for 14 campuses, we actually did analysis on input. So EH&S, and this was all publicly available information. I'm sorry, hold on one second. The inputs in the form of budget and staff, and what we were able to do was compare that to employee injuries, report injuries. And unfortunately, the N was only 14, but it did show a clear inverse relationship that the more you put it on the front end, the lower on the other end. Now, there's more work to be done here, but you get the general idea. So, okay, so here we go. Jing Wang, I think it was 2005. We absorbed a bunch of data. This is representing, I think, 102 data points, benchmarking data, and of the different relationships, square footage and number of safety personnel. There was some relationship there, but you can see it's kind of scattered. So what he was able to do was do some modeling, and then he sorted out by total campus square footage and lab square footage, and then it had to be log normally transformed. But at the end of the day, the most important part here is this R squared value. And knowing these three things, you got an R squared value of 80%, which means that 80% of the variability of that graph can be explained by these three things, which is your lab square footage, your total square footage, and whether you have a med school or a vet school. So that was kind of a keynote discovery, because that led us down a pipeline for some other things here. And I'll skip over that. So this is Bob's model. So I'm talking with folks and I said, gee, if you just give us your total square footage and your total budget, and this is 31, the N is 31. But what I want you to notice is these two peaks. And one peak centers around, and this is 5 cents per square foot per year. So about 20 cents per square foot per year for this one, and about, I don't know, 40 cents per square foot per year here. What I believe this is telling us is that lab density, in other words, the proportion of the total square footage that's lab square footage, really moves the needle. And that's what we're working on with O2's project here. So what I normally do is just split the difference here. And when I get an administrator that calls me, 30 cents per square foot per year will get you in the ballpark pretty quick. But depending on your lab density, it may move things. Bruce Brown, my colleague, he's up in Dallas now. He did an extensive project, and I'll skip through these slides here, but the most important thing is that when he did his new modeling project with Shima, all the data we needed was square footage and institutional expenditures. So those were the major blood pressure indicators there. Same thing with both staffing and budget. So I'll skip through these. And then Seth Parker worked on another project here. here's what I really want to get to. I want to cut to the chase. Every project we've done, look how total net assignable square footage has shown up. The square footage is king, I'm telling you. And the safety profession would benefit from correlating its activities to square footage, because every project we've been involved with has to do with square footage. And so here's a good example. I get a call from an administrator. I just got this new job. We got 5 million square feet, 900 million in total expenditures. Okay, 30 cents per square foot. Safety budget's probably 1.5 million. If we use Bruce Brown's predictors in his model, look how close that is, 1.56 million. It's amazing, right? And then turns out that if the same university is a member of what's called the AAHC, which means they have a medical school and then some other graduate medical program, look at that, it bumps everything up by about 30–35%. And I believe that has to do with lab density. I'm going to let O2 join in here in a second, because that's what I think is going on here. So one of the criticisms of Bruce's project was that he collected data with Shima in 2013, but he was comparing it to publicly available data that unfortunately lagged. And so there were those who felt that wasn't a valid comparison, but this is what we're trying to work on with O2. So I'm going to pause there. O2, are you on? Can you weigh in on this particular, especially this lower right-hand graph?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, I can.
So one of the things my job is to accomplish will be to look at, you look at the lower right-hand corner and the upper right corner of that graph. From what Dr. Emery said, the top one shows you the comparison that Brown and Parker did using data from 12 and 13. My job would be to look at, if we take previous 5 years worth of data, is there any significant difference? And can we extrapolate using some cool statistical methods to empower you that if you have an idea of how has your numbers progressed over the years, to be able to predict with some certainty what your input should be based on that historical data. And this is going to be a gift to the entire EHS profession, especially in higher education. But the beauty of this is we're looking for numbers from you. So that's where my project is going.
Okay, thanks. So really the whole intent of this webinar is summarized in this graphic. And that is, for those of you who are not in hurricane land, this is referred to as a spaghetti model, but one can develop many different models. And as you might imagine, portrayed here, it could be the NOAA model, it could be the European model, but in general, there was information inputted and there's various weighting factors. And lo and behold, the hurricane's going to go up the East Coast, so it ain't coming to Houston. So that's kind of important stuff. And that's probably the best we can do for safety programs, because if I go back to that logic model, the best we can do is say, here's the inputs, but now we got to get to the outcomes. But that's a problem for another day. So all of this stuff that we've done so far has been a series of master's or doctorate dissertations or theses. And people ask me all the time, has it been published? Well, it's actually published electronically, but we are striving to do a comprehensive paper if we get people to engage in this data collection process, which that's what I hope to implore people to do, that O2 Cruz project could be a capstone for this entire effort. Now, why is this important? Well, now that we know that square footage is kind of important, this is probably the most impactful PowerPoint slide I ever made in my life. Because once I got religion on that, I thought, wow, there's a lot of things that are driven by square footage. So utilities, take the utility bill, divide it by the square footage, 5.38 cents per square foot per year. Facilities, $3 per square foot per year. We go down to police and IT, $1. Contract housekeeping, 58 cents per square foot per year. And then get all the way down to safety, 45 cents per square foot per year. So that puts things in perspective pretty quickly. And when belts get tight, maybe that's important information to have in front of leadership. So with regard to key performance indicators, and again, I welcome your feedback on this, but from my career, the KPIs are how many people got hurt, sick, or died, how much property got damaged, what's the deal with compliance, finances, and then client satisfaction. And so this is the way we collect data, and I'll whip through these pretty quick, but here's data on the total number of first reports of injury by population. Many universities cannot do this because employee data is in one place, medical residents in another, students in another, but I would argue that's important to gauge the entire health of the organization. This graph is kind of interesting because on the left, what it shows, and this is part of our annual report, it shows our total square footage as we grow, and the dark blue is the research square footage. And then on the right is our funding, and you'll notice that the green was declining, but then we were able to reverse that trend and actually bring the money back up because safety programs need to grow proportionally to the size of the institution. Now, for national data, some of you may be familiar with NAICS codes, North American Industrial Classification System. So in our case, we're somewhere between a hospital, 622, and a university, 6113. And lo and behold, our data for injuries for employees is actually below both. That's pretty powerful stuff to show to upper management. And then on the right-hand side is our data compared to best-in-class organizations such as Corning, DuPont, and Dow. So, okay, so the most important part of this whole thing is comparison is the mother of insight. And it's really, really important that all of our members and constituency with SHIMA contribute to the survey that O2 has created, because that's the only way we're going to be able to come to a point where we can say, on average, here's what a university or college might expend on accident prevention or risk control. And then from there, at least that's a starting point, then it gets to the whole issue of outcomes. We'll work on that later, but it's the inputs as I see it right now. So I'm going to pause right there and really emphasize here that we are an all volunteer Army. Everybody in SHIMA, we got plenty of day job things to do. My phone is actually physically hot right now, but O2, would you agree with this approach?
Yes, I agree completely. And I'm going to just share with my colleagues. When I got into this, it was very interesting. But what we've seen so far, which is what we need the data to validate, is that university is different from industry in the terms of the comprehensiveness of the hazards. And more of that is weighed towards the research or clinical activities that's happening there. In a typical industry setting, maybe they are dealing with hazardous chemicals, so few chemical hazards with physical hazards. But at the university, you see changing people and changing hazards because of the changing and dynamic nature of the research. And like Bob says, this is where we create knowledge, not transfer knowledge. So when you are trying to create something, there is room for mistake, room for the firsts. So with this in mind, we're trying to also look at what is the contribution of research to the total square foot that moves the needle. So what percentage would you have based on your research to total square footage, which moves the needle toward to see what the outcomes look like. So I really cannot speak enough to the value of having a pool of data to be able to showcase what do we have, and we can jointly present as one unique organization to promote the value of what we do to our organizations.
Okay, okay. So let's to summarize here, and then I guess Ryan, are you going to field questions? Or I'm not sure how this will work, but
Yeah, that's exactly what I'll do, Bob. Absolutely.
okay, cool beans. All right, so yeah, so the end of the day, square footage is king. I'm letting you know that. There were these 4 key performance indicators: losses, compliance, finance, and client satisfaction. I would encourage everyone to collect that sort of data and make sure you can lay it on the table upon request. And change and comparisons are inevitable, so you better get squared away on this, because it ain't going away, I can tell you that. So rational comparisons are made on a regular basis there. So I would just summarize all this by saying, hey, I welcome your feedback. We're all in the same boat. But if there are any concerns about this approach, please arrive with evidence and data to the contrary. I've received feedback from some of my colleagues, which I respect, but there's an absence of data to say, oh, you know, that's not really the case. But boy, I sure have learned, at least in my corner of the world, that the total net assignable square footage is really, really powerful on a number of aspects there. So, okay, I'm going to stop here. So, Ryan.
Yep, got a couple of questions.
I think I have a logo. Maybe I'm supposed to show the logo. So stop share. How about that?
You're fine. No worries.
Okay,
we got a few questions that have come in while you've been presenting here, Bob. And O2 can speak to a few of these as well. But from Mark and Edward, these questions are very similar. So I'm going to read them back to back, and you guys can, either one of you can address them. But Mark says, for the med school piece, how does the hospital size work into this? I believe hospitals are big users of EHS services and certainly are a contributor to our high employee injury rate. And then Edward says, are the vet med schools total net assignable square footage accounted differently from the rest of the research space? So can you speak to those?
I can speak to those in volumes. So interestingly enough, if I'm allowed to go back, can I share my screen again? Hold on. Shoot. Share screen. It's fascinating that we bring up this question. So let me try to move this up and down. Yeah. Okay. Here's the data. Okay. Look at this. Total campus square footage, an R-squared value of 48%. Okay. And then when we got down to this issue, exactly what they're bringing up, do you have a med school or vet school? Look how the model improved, but it only improved by 7% from a simple question, yes or no, do you have a med school or vet school? So in other words, that's what's led me to this issue of, I think it has to do with research or clinical square footage. That's what I think is going on. And that's why it's so important for O2's project here. That you don't see this in public health very often, by the way, an R squared value of 48%, but then you get down to here, 80%, that's pretty amazing. And so I think the colleagues who sent messages there, I suspect they have a contract with the hospitals that they're supporting. I guess, I don't know, but I'm happy to talk with them offline, but it's an interesting aspect here if you examine that particular graph. Stop.
Okay.
Okay.
We have a couple of other related questions here too, so I'll read both of these back to back as well, because I think they largely touch on the same thing. This is from Mark Kavanaugh and Philip Lewis. Mark asks, can we talk about how to count EH&S employees? So if I have EH&S employees who test fire alarm systems, but another institution contracts that out, will I get penalized because I have more staff? And then Philip asks, basically, what does EHS full-time equivalent encompass? Does it just include professional level staffing, or does it also include administrative support, et cetera? So can you address those two things?
Sure. Yes. Yeah, that's an age-old problem. But think of my commentary would be, think of yourself as the president of the university, and you just want to know, what is the total commitment to EH&S? So what we've done through our projects here is lumped everybody together. Secretaries, everybody. What is the total outlay for EH&S? And then at the cut point, and I don't know if Bruce Brown's on this thing, but I welcome his commentary, but the cut point was, if there's any people that are half an FTE or contract or whatever, if they're less than 0.5 FTE, don't count them in. If they're greater than 0.5 FTE, count them in. Yeah, at some point you got to make a decision on these things. And we're typically a department of 30, 35 people. You know, you just got to make that cut point. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dennis Elmore is asking about, essentially this is a kind of a people working from home topic. So people are working from home at a much higher rate due to COVID, may lead to reduced net assignable square footage over the next several years. As your dependent variables are tied so closely to this net assignable square footage, how is this likely to affect the models?
I can't point to any evidence, but I'll give you my thinking is that eventually things will return back to people being on campus. Probably takes a year. I don't know, but it's going to happen. And as the machine moves forward, I don't think we're going to go back to the same thing we were doing before. I wouldn't get distracted by this current arrangement where people are at home. Certainly want to take care of them. I mean, our employees, we want to do what we can to make sure they're fine, but I don't believe it's going to persist. But Bob's opinion, make sure you.
Sure. I think we're all kind of left a little bit to conjecture a bit about that at this point, but we certainly appreciate your opinion on that. Michelle is asking, some institutions are experiencing outsourcing of EHS.
Yes.
Any thoughts on best strategies to combat outsourcing?
Yes. In capital letters, yes. It's coming, right? So think about this for a second. Universities, there are many. What universities do is teaching, research, and service. What they don't do is auto repair, print shops, housekeeping, blah, 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 blah. You can go on down the list. And one of those things that I believe is going to show up on that radar screen is safety. And so I think it's critically important for safety to be able to tell their story about what value they bring to the table to not be outsourced. And we went through this right here. And I'll tell you, NASA's right down the road here. We're in Houston, right? And I know the safety guy there. And he said, one of the problems with all these contractors is their work is limited to the contract. So they walk down the hall, and every person on this call knows this. Safety, you're walking down the hall and someone grabs you and you've got some issue. Well, when it's a contracted arrangement, sorry, that's not part of our contract. We don't do that. We only do these. So safety really needs to focus in on what value do we bring to the customers we support. But yes, whoever that person is, they get a gold star for asking that question, because that wave is coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all been experiencing that, for some time as it relates to a number of things that we do as EHS departments. And I think we can all relate to it to some extent. And the other thing that I would interject on that too, Bob, is, and hopefully, some people can concur with this, is that not only does the scope of their contract, and once that's done, are they no longer then committed to taking care of whatever the issue is that they were brought in to handle, but also just their vested interest in general, in terms of if they don't have a reason to, while the work is ongoing, to be as vested as an internal personnel person might be, that has some level of probably added level of care for the institution, then I see that sometimes as a quality issue for the work that gets done.
Amen. Yes. Capture that. Yes, you hit the nail on the head there.
Well, thank you for addressing that. Danielle's asking, how do you define a research space versus academic, such as teaching labs, wood shops, fine art departments? These blur a line for us, and we see some types of, quote, academic research in areas not commonly considered.
Okay, good question. So these data points, the reason we pick them is that they have to actually be reported to regulatory agencies, and they are not subjected to interpretation. So my advice to people all the time is, don't make up the number yourself, get what the university is reporting. So sometimes, and I don't know if Bruce Brown's on the, Bruce, are you out there? But anyhow, if he is, he can weigh in. But there are some publicly available databases for things such as reported research square footage. So my point is don't glean it yourself. Pick from what's publicly available. And the reason that's important is the universities, that's how their indirect cost recovery is compensated. And so it shouldn't be a mystical number. Go to contracts and grants or someone within your university. And that's the part that really gets me with regard to health and safety, is that health and safety doesn't know these numbers, but those numbers are most crucial for the activities that we undertake.
Okay, thank you. Philip's asking you to expound upon the assignable square footage to expenditure calculation when the safety folks are not centralized to EHS, such as like when you have an embedded safety professional, or schools have safety officers, departments have safety coordinators, that kind of thing, and how should they be factored into the calculation?
Yeah, good, very good point. I wish Bruce was on here, because that's why we try to make this definition that if the person does greater than 50% of their time doing safety stuff, count them in, and less than 50% count them out. Because I understand exactly what this person is saying, that maybe the College of Engineering has a person who's also the safety guy or gal, but we need to make some sort of determination about how much of their time is expended to do that. So the cut point we set for Bruce's project was 50%. So that's not magical, by the way. We just, it just seemed like a good cut point to make.
Okay, great. Victor's asking about, related to reduction in net assignable square footage in the future, discussions on our campus have primarily centered, well, this is not really so much a question as it is a comment, but discussions on our campus have primarily centered on repurposing space, not reducing it. So I'm sure that maybe some other institutions are probably entertaining a similar line of thinking on that. Scott was also chiming in, Scott Bordone, about client satisfaction, and that client satisfaction measure might be a helpful way of grabbing onto something that you can use to kind of use outsourcing prevention. And I don't know if maybe you have any thoughts on that, Bob, in terms of, being able to grab some metric as it relates to client satisfaction, contracted out EHS activities versus in-house type activities for EHS related
Well,
stuff.
I don't have the magic formula for that, but I will tell you that over the years, what we've learned is that you don't want to do a blanket survey to the entire university, but what you want to do is targeted to the customers. For example, one year we pick radiation safety, all the people who have protocols using radioactive material. How are we doing? Next year, biosafety, right? And we've done that and I'm happy to share with anybody if they have an interest in this. I'm happy to share. They're just short surveys, Qualtrics. It's 6 or 8 questions. But what we've now done is move to the key external groups that we support, such as animal care, police, facilities, auxiliaries, that sort of stuff. So we have data. So when someone comes and starts chirping in the president's ear, complaining on the elevator, I can say, well, here's the survey we did, and here's what we found, and here's what we're doing about it. So I would argue that's very, very important for a safety program to overtly gauge the temperature of the people you serve.
Okay, and I think this is kind of a comment and question that also speaks to that same topic regarding outsourcing. Tom is asking, aren't we putting our heads on the chopping block by giving administrators a formula for how much they need to spend on, quote, safety when we never define what a safety position is?
Yeah, excellent question, right? I mean, that's most of my career has been focused on how much money do we put into prevention? And that's the calls I get from the new administrator that says, this is part of my portfolio. I'm not sure what it is I'm supposed to do. How much are we supposed to be spending? I wouldn't say we're putting our heads on our chopping block. What I would say is, let's make sure we have our stuff squared away or our data squared away to say, here's what we're doing. Because the first question they're going to ask is, well, what about the people up the street? And what about the people over there? Comparison is the mother of insight. And so to be prepared and say, here's what we're spending on safety, here's what these folks are doing, here's what they're doing, and here's our outcomes. That's what I think we need to get better at.
Okay. And then we'll keep this to the last question. It is the last question I see. There's a couple of comments on here, but I know we're getting close to wrap up time here and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But Scott Bordone also asked again, kind of related to what we were talking about, the fire safety contract will work if they are managed via facilities, and like, would you include those in terms of calculating in, how we're gauging the metrics of this, and would so an example he lists here is, would fire suppression system work be included in the money in the full-time equivalent question?
A short answer there. I'm happy to have a side conversation with whoever sent me that note, but my cut point is fixed systems. So if it's sprinklers, churn tanks, all that kind of stuff, that's facilities things. But if it's fire drills, education, perhaps portables, whatever, that's safety's thing. It's always, an unclear cut, but you get the general idea. That's each university EH&S systems cut a little different, but you get the general gist there. But before I cut off, I just want to make sure, underscore, this entire project only succeeds based on the data provided by the membership. And I cannot underscore that enough. And I see John there on my screen. And if he could underscore that, if we don't get the data, we really can't make these meaningful comparisons. So John, can you kick people in the rear end?
Well, I can politely suggest that they that they get this data information, submitted. And You know, we've submitted here at Texas A&M, and we use this data. We're looking at staffing right now. We've actually just recently went through an exercise where we were asked to look at staffing for the next 5 years and even the next 25. And so we're looking at, we have a big office. We need more space. We need to account for our efforts. And so this is definitely a great tool, but it's only as good as the data that's in it. So if this is something you even think you might use with your administration, the data needs to be put in there. And so wholeheartedly behind this initiative, we need to get the data in. So take the time. It takes a little bit of effort. It does to get that data in there, but it is the value of the output from the data is much more than the effort you're going to take to get your information in. So that's my encouragement to you all. I hope that is what you're looking for, Dr. Emery, but I can't say it enough or stress it enough, for sure.
Thanks, John. Really quickly to wrap up, again, I know we're a minute over already, but O2, I was hoping you could maybe chime in real quick and let folks know how they can access the survey, that it is still open, and can they contact you if they're having any issues? Can you speak a little bit to that really quickly before we wrap up?
Yes, please. And I really appreciate the people that have submitted their data. If you have not, the survey is still open because we need a bigger pool. I am available because one of the jobs I do here is make life easy for people to do their job. So this is no different. If you have any challenge with the link that was sent out to the Shima office, I'm very sure after this webinar, the link will be posted again. I can post it in the chat. If you have any problem, I'm going to put my email address in there. Please feel free to contact me directly. My job is to make it easy for you to find the information and also submit that as well.
Sounds good. Thanks. So yeah, a couple comments just to wrap up here. A few people giving you guys kudos on the presentation. Thank you for the information. It seems like everybody got something out of it. So we really appreciate you guys giving us your time to pull this together. Katie did post a hyperlink to the survey in the chat for those of you that have not yet accessed it and you're wondering how to get to it. It's there in the chat. Victor, I saw that you had one other question we weren't able to get to. I'll make sure I loop you in with Bob directly to make sure that we address that for you. I haven't forgotten about it. Mm-hmm. And then John just has one last pitch on the chat too, to make sure to make an announcement. Abstract submission for the upcoming annual conference in July is fast approaching. That deadline is, I believe, the end of this year. Is that right, John? I believe it's December 31st. So make sure you get those abstracts in for those of you that want to, submit a educational session, a PDS, whatever it may be. We're looking for any and all comers. And then Katie also just posted a link in there of how you get to the abstract submission as well. So that's all available for you guys there. And then O2 he posted his email there if you guys wish to contact him directly. I think that's everything. I tried to run through stuff as quickly as I can. I know we're a few minutes over, but again, appreciate you guys very much for your time. Thank all of you that attended for joining us today. For all of you guys that we won't get a chance to converse with before then, hope everybody has a wonderful holiday break, whatever you may or may not celebrate. Enjoy your time, unplug for a little bit, and hopefully cheers to a better 2021. So hope everybody has a good one. Thank you so much.